My name is Phyllis Unterschuetz.
I'm Gene.
We're a tag team. We've been married for 40 years. We've been doing race unity work for about 15 years full time. And just to give you a little bit of now this is when I'm supposed to start my timer, just to make sure I don't talk too long, okay. We grew up in the Chicago suburbs, and I grew up in a town that was 99.93% white. I never even talked to anybody who was black until I was in college. It was the first conversation I ever had. And I was so nervous about talking to this man that I was literally shaking when I talked to him. So that's the kind of separation I grew up in. I was raised by a father who tried very, very hard to teach me racism, and a mother who succeeded in teaching me love. And so it was an interesting balance growing up. Gene and I started in 1997. We sold our house in the suburbs and moved into an RV, and we started traveling around the country, and our goal was to travel for about 6 months, and then we were going to get another house and get another job. I don't know what we thought we were going to do. And so that was 15 years ago. When we first started traveling, we didn't know what we were doing. And we got to the second community on our trip, and there was an African-American family there, and they had sons that were in their early teens. And two of their sons sat with us for several hours every day and began to train us in the ways of institutional racism. We didn't really know why they were doing that, but we were very grateful. We moved on to our next community, and we had a similar experience there. And in fact, as we moved from one community to the next, everywhere we went, we were meeting black friends who sat us down and trained us about their lives and how their lives were impacted not only by institutional racism, but by the personal racial prejudice that they encountered on a daily basis. And at some point, we realized we were being prepared for something. We got to South Carolina, which sits very warmly in our hearts. And we were able to do a 9-week series of workshops on racial unity. And that experience really changed us completely. And from that point on, we decided, okay, this is our calling, this is what we need to do. And so we've been talking about racial unity for the past 15 years. We wrote a book called Longing, Stories of Racial Healing, and that was published in May of 2010. And we just completed a book tour not too long ago. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. The reason we titled our book Longing, Stories of Racial Healing is because we believe that the longing to be connected with one another is inherent in our design. It's built into our souls in some way. And this separation that's come about as a result of institutional racism and racial conditioning is contrary to our nature. It leaves us feeling disrupted. It leaves us feeling out of touch with our true selves. And so what we're trying to get us to understand is to reach inside, tap into that longing, understand that for what it is, and reach out to connect with one another and heal the separation. That's my 3 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'm going to do something I've never done before and say, these are our core assumptions. To be successful in life, we believe it's important to know what our purpose in life is. It's important to know what the purpose of anything is so that we can utilize it to the best advantage. So we need to know what our design is and what we're here for. So we believe that we're here to know who we are and to be who we are. I'll expand on that a little bit. Okay. To know who we are requires us to know what our identity is. And most people, when we've been in workshops where they've asked people to talk about their identity and make a list of who you are, what your identity is, we come up with gender, nationality, race or ethnicity, age, job, career, family, marital status. Those are kind of the typical things that describe our identity. So So we believe that our true identity is spiritual, which means that our basic human design consists of capacities such as compassion, forgiveness, and trustworthiness. And as we develop these capacities and express them in service to our family and our community, we release the power to bring about sustainable social change, and we experience personal transformation. And collective transformation results in the emergence of an ever-advancing civilization. So be who you are. To know who you are requires you to be who you are. This means expressing our spiritual identity in everything we do. Without expression, no change occurs. So if we aren't expressing our spiritual capacities of compassion and forgiveness and trustworthiness in our activities, in our relationships with one another, there will be no result felt in the community that we live in or in the family. So need to belong. The need to belong is pretty elementary as far as our human design. According to Abraham Maslow, we have the first need in that hierarchy that he developed is food and shelter. Next comes safety, and next comes belonging. So it's pretty low. It's pretty primary to our survival and our ability to navigate. So taking the first step is connecting. It's the pattern of the universe and essential to understanding our true identity. Racism prevents us from connecting. So racism actually works against the pattern of the universe. Addressing the challenges of both race and class is essential. But our work is focusing on race, so that's what we'll be talking about today. Finding transformation is becoming advanced versions of ourselves. So what that means is if I'm 10% trustworthy today on a big continuum from 0 to 100, hopefully as I progress, 5 years, 10 years down the road, I'll be 20% trustworthy. Hopefully I'll be much more than that, but that's sort of the idea that we can improve ourselves. We can develop our spiritual capacities, and as we develop our spiritual capacities, we release power. We release power that I believe we'll find in the future that power is stronger and more effective than material power, financial power, political power. We have access to that power, all of us.
So what we're going to do in this workshop, we're going to share with you some brief excerpts out of our book, and then we're going to use those as a basis for conversation. Would you like to sit over there so that there's one chair over there or there so that you're in the circle?
Yay.
Yeah, you don't have to, but it would be great. Our purpose for being in this room together is to explore ways for us all to become racial healers. And that work of racial healing is inner work and it's outer work. And the inner work is kind of what our book is about, because as we started traveling and doing race unity work, our own unconscious racial conditioning as white people started coming up. We found ourselves doing things and saying things that were causing breaches in the relationships that we were trying to build. And it was very painful to us because we thought we were pretty good. We thought we'd pretty much conquered racial prejudice. And what we didn't understand was the insidious nature of the brainwashing that's happened to all of us in this country. This brainwashing has been fed to us through our media, through our entertainment industry. Anyone who has grown up in this country or anyone who comes into this country has experienced brainwashing around race. And it sits at a very unconscious level frequently for white people. And I'm white, so that's whose experience I'm going to speak about. Most of our interactions were with black folks as we were traveling. So people often say, well, how come all your stories are about black and white? Because that was our experience. But what we've learned in our stories, we can extrapolate and use this with any groups of the human family that have been separated. So the inner work is about understanding that we've been conditioned, being brave enough to look at that conditioning and to see what it is, being able to tolerate sitting with the discomfort of having somebody point out our unconscious conditioning to us. And that's a very difficult thing. And yet if our black friends had not trusted us and loved us and been courageous enough to point out what they saw happening inside of us, we would be just as ignorant as we ever were. We're still pretty ignorant in very many ways, but we've had some wonderful trainers and teachers throughout our trip. One of the ways that you can bring an unconscious attitude up to the conscious level, perhaps the only way of doing that, is to kind of pluck yourself out of your normal daily routine and set yourself down somewhere where that unconscious conditioning will come up to the conscious level. And that's the point at which you can say, I see that for what that is. I didn't ask for this brainwashing. I didn't ask to be robbed of the freedom to relate to other people according to my nobility. And yet that's what's happened. That's what this racial conditioning does to us. It kind of takes over for us. And in situations where we might otherwise respond according to our nobility, instead we respond according to fear or according to the stereotypes that we've learned about one another. And so these stories are about situations in which our own unconscious conditioning came to the surface and what we did about it. So we're going to share very brief excerpts with you, and then we're going to just have a discussion. I think we'll just stay in a large group discussion rather than trying to break up in pairs, and just talk about what you saw happening. And let's see if there's anything else that I want to say about that. Once you've done this inner work of becoming aware, being willing to change what you find inside your own heart, then that becomes reflected in the outer work of transforming our relationships with one another. And these relationships need to be based on absolute honesty, willingness to face some discomfort, willingness to take some risks, willingness to listen without being defensive. These are skills that have to be practiced and developed. So I think that's all I'll say for now, and go right ahead.
So our book consists of 30 stories, 15 from Phyllis, 15 from me, and they're all true stories. I'm going to start with a story called The Word. And as you're listening to this story, think about this, what Phyllis has been saying about the relationship, because this is the building block of society, the building block of our family, the building block of our community. The Word starts with a journal entry. The Word, insidious agent of disintegration, is a shapeshifter. It takes on whichever form is best suited to its mission, to wreak havoc when the brain's security guard dozes off. Gene, prologue. I could still hear Lamont's voice as he rushed from one black friend to another and, like an old-time crier, shouted, "Unterschuetz said the word." What? He what? Unterschuetz said the word. He what? Oh, no. What are you going to do? I was bewildered as I watched this outlandish scene unfold. We were gathered outside at night, and apparently I had done something or said something that had provoked Lamont's odd behavior. I thought, this is just a joke. I work with these guys. Lamont and I are friends. He's just showing his buddy how close we are. I stood grinning as I watched him move among the men and waited for their expressions of anger and distress to disappear with a signal from Lamont and be replaced by smiles revealing camaraderie. But their grim mood intensified. All the black guys glared at me, and I finally realized that this was no joke. I was in danger. Gradually, Lamont's message sunk in. Unterschuetz said the word. The word. The word? Did he mean the N-word? No, I didn't say anything like that. I did not say the word. Lamont finally made his way back to me and snapped, "You said the word, man. I thought you were okay, but now we're finished. You're in trouble. You better watch out." They were all gathered tightly around me, pushing, shouting out their condemnation. I found Lamont's eyes and said, "I didn't say the word, man. Really, I didn't." I appealed to the group. I didn't. "Yeah, you did," Lamont growled. "Don't deny it." "Yeah, "Don't deny it," the group chorused. Glancing from one face to another, I sought a friend, an ally, a lifeline. I found only contempt, frustration, distrust. I thought, what's going on? Is this real? As they walked away from me, muttering, each man gave me one last shove. I stood alone in the dark, watching the group of men from a distance. I was cut off, and I felt a sense of loss I was not prepared to deal with. I guessed they must be looking at me as they continued to rehash what had just gone down. But in the darkness, I could only see obscure movements in the shadows, and now and then momentary bursts of ambient light reflecting off objects in motion. A belt buckle, a wristwatch, a cross on a neck chain, teeth. Teeth. I did not say the word, I thought. What I said was, "Hey, Lamont, smile so we can see where we are." That is definitely not the word. What's his problem anyway? I thought we were friends. Can't he take a joke? I guess we really weren't as close as I thought we were. Well, I'll be careful in the future, not going to let my defenses down, think someone's my friend. It was just a joke. Why the hell is he so sensitive? I didn't do anything wrong. He's the one with the hang-up. It was 1968. For weeks after that incident, I felt invisible to Lamont and the other black men. It was as if I had been airbrushed right out of their picture of reality. Lamont had reached out to me, and we'd had conversations in which we listened to each other's life goals and plans for the future. It was Lamont who left the security of his group of friends to come over to me and make the connection. He took the initiative, and I was receptive, but I was ignorant of so much. I had no clue about the civil rights drama that was raging throughout the United States, and absolutely no understanding about the genocide casually referred to as slavery and its relationship to raised fists. Black power was the mantra that accompanied the gesture. I thought it was simply a greeting. Black is beautiful was another common expression that left me wondering, why do they say that? I can't imagine saying white is beautiful. We're all beautiful in our own way. Why is it so important to shout it out? My relationship with Lamont was never mended. He stayed close to his buddies and distanced himself from me. At that stage of my life, committing to relationships required a level of maturity I had not attained. My interactions with people were governed by patterns of social survival that I had acquired in grade school and junior high. A repertoire of reactions that were supposed to keep me safe in every situation, but which in fact left me insecure, wary, and vulnerable. When I was middle-aged and we started traveling, I had encounters that helped me get insights about my interactions with African Americans. On the East Coast, we met a black woman named Sophie, and in a conversation with her, I related the experience with Lamont and my analysis of it. I had gained some understanding about race and racism, and in retrospect, I see that my purpose in sharing that anecdote was to impress her with my current awareness of the unconscious racial prejudice I had back in 1968. As I poured out my tale, I expected smiles and feedback that would assure me I was a good white man, illumined and compassionate. But Sophie's expression was serious. I watched her face contort into a grimace, yet expected her to say something like, "You got it, Gene, you understand." Instead, she said, "Oh, that poor young man. He must have been so embarrassed." I was shocked. It had never occurred to me that Lamont might have been embarrassed. Since 1968, I had remembered him simply as an oversensitive and angry young black man. And now I was upset that Sophie didn't praise me for being enlightened. Up to that moment, I had thought my understanding about racism was substantial. I had been trained to be a race unity workshop facilitator and recognized some of the effects of racism. But Sophie's response to my story suggested I was missing something, and I felt that an enormous deficit had been exposed. I was so humiliated, I wanted to quit working for racial unity. But when I thought about Sophie's reaction to my story, I had to ask myself, what kind of feedback did Lamont get from his friends? Did they say, "Told you not to trust a white guy"? Was he embarrassed that he judged me wrong? had he looked foolish in their eyes. So I'm going to pause right there. This is kind of a two-parter, a before and after, if you will. This is the before, and I'd like to ask you to share a couple of insights. We have time for maybe 3 insights or questions, and to kind of get you thinking in the right way. What was it that destroyed this relationship between myself and Lamont? What do you think destroyed that relationship?
Misunderstanding. Communication.
Okay, misunderstanding, miscommunication. Can you expand on that?
Well, he said he thought you said the N-word dead, and you expressed it in another manner, but he didn't take it in that manner because he wasn't hearing you anymore.
Okay.
So it was his lack of understanding what you were trying to say and not hearing you the way you were saying it. So,
All right.
It was also your lack of understanding of how he might react. I mean, how that might be demeaning.
Okay. All right.
I would have called that insensitivity.
Well, I was thinking about how, part of the painful thing about the black-white racism is the otherness, and so your comment was, like kind of being flip. It was kind of a flip comment, about, the otherness of him. Which, if there were no racism, if that didn't even exist, it could be taken that way. It could be like a lighthearted thing. We all joke about each other, but humor, when there's so much pain about the difference in the appearance. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That the black-white thing is all about appearance. So let's bring in that.
Emmanuel Chandler, Coastal University, South Carolina. I definitely, even when I heard this situation, I definitely think it was just the idea of understanding the relationship that the both of you had. And because I definitely don't think the comment just wasn't just the problem itself or how he reacted to it just itself, but understanding the relationship that you all had, spending more time and understanding that relationship and understanding that this would not have been problematic if I understood that this would have been his problem or that kind of thing. So even with my friends now, I spend a lot of time understanding what they like, what they dislike, this and that and the third, because I think understanding the individual person makes a lot difference than just the words you say. Because sometimes things can be code for, certain things, and it actually is an inside joke or whatever the case may be. But just understanding that relationship and making sure that that works out is more the issue that I think works better versus just saying a couple of words or it even being viewed a different way.
Thank you all. What's really important is for you all to listen to your own comments, because outside of this conference, we come back to a community where we have to listen to one another and try to find solutions to the issues that are plaguing our communities. Thank you for that. That kind of talks to the other question I was going to say, what could have mended this relationship? But I'm going to move on to part 2, the after. Did you have a thought?
Yeah, I did want to say something. I wanted to piggyback on what he was saying. It also depends on your friendship, because there's friendship and there's friends and there's acquaintances.
Okay.
So it depends on how really close you really were, and also depends on whether or not, because when I'm listening to that story and how he runs to his other friends, I'm wondering if it was already a strained relationship was coming, and that the comment that you made just hit the head on the nail, that we're done. But if you were really friends, close friends, then he would explain to you what was said was not nice. Because if that wasn't a good thing to say, you don't say those things. And it does take some time. Good friends may make, I need to think about this first, so I get the anger out, and then tomorrow I'll call you and say, you know what you said yesterday wasn't a good idea. But for that particular situation to happen, it's because I'm looking at 2 scenarios here, that it may have been a strained relationship, and what you comment just okay, I'm done with that. Or it could have been, he could have been influenced by peer pressure by his other friends, or it's You know, it's like, I can't handle this, I don't know how to tell him, and we're just gonna have to just split.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that's involved in that. So I don't think just one answer.
I think what both of you are saying, is very kind. But I think sometimes out in public, one has to, especially if you're white or perceived to be white, you have to be very careful what you say. So it doesn't cause hurt. I mean, it doesn't have to be with a person of color, but it could be with anybody. But sometimes our flip remarks are taken quite seriously and taken quite to heart. I think you're both being very nice about it.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm going to read part 2 here so we can move on. Thank you for your comments. They're really, really valuable, and I hope you've listened to one another because, like I said, this is what we have to do to really wrestle with this, and we need to talk about racial issues because they aren't just going to disappear. This one took place in 2005, Tennessee, California to Tennessee. A phone call from California to Tennessee. A careless word or comment, even in the context of a solid friendship, can cause problems. I'm thinking about a phone conversation with Deborah, an African-American woman Phyllis and I met in California. We became close friends before she moved back to her hometown in the South, and I call her occasionally to chat. A problem for me when I'm talking on the phone is that I can't see the facial expressions and body language I normally depend on to judge the impact of my words and to be sure I've been understood. A few minutes into our conversation, Deborah said, "You should meet my friend James. You and he have a lot in common." His name sounded familiar, and she had mentioned James to me before, and I accessed the information about him I'd filed away in memory. In an effort not to slow down the conversation, I sorted quickly through details about James. African American, about Deborah's age, musician, educator. Yes, she'd once said something about him being an intellectual with strong opinions on education. I finished my summary, and in an attempt to express everything in one word, my verbal shorthand, I said, "Oh, you mean the guy who's uppity?" I held the phone to my ear, waiting for Deborah's, "Yeah, that's him." But there was only silence. A silence that was as deafening as if my head were the clapper in a huge church tower bell, tolling the message for everyone in the community to hear. Unterschuetz said the word. Unterschuetz said the word. Damn, I did say the word. And I knew exactly what form that shapeshifter demon had taken on this time. Uppity. I sensed that something was not right as the word left my mouth and escaped as if part of a well-planned prison break to resume its thuggish activities on the outside. The word vibrated Deborah's auditory nerves and was then decoded by some apparatus in her brain. Its content was interpreted, then evaluated and passed on to her heart. In the meantime, I was left to imagine the response she was having. Was she hurt, angry, disappointed that she had trusted me as a friend? I wanted to be trustworthy, and I felt that the only way I could be certain of its success was to see trust reflected in her eyes. But now, separated by distance, I was unable to see the visual cues upon which I so heavily depended. Some 10 to 15 seconds of silence had elapsed. I think I said something that might have hurt you, I finally managed to mumble, and I think it was the word uppity. "Yeah, that's an interesting word," she said. "I know better than to use that word. I know that historically it's been used maliciously, and I know that its effect cuts deep. I'm really sorry." "It's all right, Gene. I know your heart. I know you weren't trying to hurt me." I apologized again and then asked, "Are we still okay?" "Yes, we're okay," she said. "You sure?" "Yes." "Sure?" "Yes." We talked about the word for another hour and a half. When I hung up, I was still unsettled, but I had to trust that Deborah had told me the truth when she said she forgave me and loved me. To doubt her sincerity would inhibit the growth of our friendship. Phyllis and I recently visited Deborah. Our time together was precious but too brief. We ate delicious Southern-cooked meals, talked about the challenges and joys of life, attended a devotional gathering, and watched a movie. All three of us are committed to our friendship, and we've come to a joint conclusion. Love is stronger than the word. So we're kind of short on time, but if anybody has a comment that they'd like to offer.
I just had one other thought that was from different people's comment, is the word trust. I'm sorry, I don't know your names, but the things that you both said, the word trust came up, that there's a lack of trust between the races, and then in any relationship, trust is, crucial. But
So the one question I want to ask, hold that.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to answer it right now, if we don't have time, at least think about it. What was it that kept this relationship going? This woman and we are still friends. So what was it that, that maintained the relationship, made it sustainable? Please.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's interesting. You had a similar situation arise between two people, but one was between a man and a woman, and that ended up working out. One was between a man and a man. And what made me think about this is when you said, I would have called and discussed it when you were talking about your interaction with Lamont, and that's something that especially two adolescent boys would just not do. So I think that definitely factors into it, where you felt comfortable saying, not only because she was your friend, but it's also just a normal interaction to have with someone. It's just being a woman and saying, I hurt you, and that's something that you wouldn't necessarily say to even some of your closest guy friends. So it's definitely an interesting way to look at it.
Cool. Okay, so my first story is finished here. I'm going to turn this over to Phyllis. I just want to say thank you for your comments, and this is really what we should be doing a lot when we go back to our communities, our campus, or whatever. We need to talk, and there are no right answers. The right answer is a combination, and
Right.
we are the ones empowered to collaborate in finding solutions.
So I'm going to share, I'm not going to read, I've decided I'm going to just relate this story to you. And again, we'll kind of do it in two parts. I'll tell you the first part, and then we'll have a discussion about it, and then I'll tell you the second part. So this happened when we were in Chicago. It wasn't that many years ago, I think 2005 or something. And our son was with us, and our son at the time was 20 years old. We were at a restaurant, and we had a black waitress who was very accessible, very warm and friendly, and we started to feel this camaraderie that you can feel with somebody who just comes at you with such an open heart. And we just spent the whole meal talking with her and interacting with her. She was such a delightful woman. And at one point, she was saying something about her daughter, and we were talking about parenting and how difficult it was to raise kids in these chaotic times. And all of a sudden, she got this really far away look on her face, and she seemed very just distant and kind of burdened. And she said, it's not really my daughter I'm worried about. She said, I have a teenage son, and I'm so worried about him. There is so much he has to deal with out there. And I was in mother mode. I was not in white person mode. This is one of the things about white privilege, is that you can forget that you're white if you like to, and switch into another mode that you think has nothing to do with being white. And I hope to catch myself at this when I do this, but I don't catch myself every time. And this was one of those times when I didn't, and I switched into mother mode. And I wanted to say something to make her feel better because she just looked so burdened. And so I looked over at my son, who was 20, and I was thinking, things are so much better now that he's not a teenager. He's a young man, and his life is easier, and everything's great. So I just wanted to say something to her, and I just looked into her eyes, and I gestured to my son, and I said, I just want to tell you that things do get better as they get older. Really, everything gets so much easier as they get closer to adulthood. I promise things will get easier for your son. And everything changed in that moment between me and her. We had this warm thing going back and forth that felt so good. And after I said that, it was like a lead veil fell between us, and she just disappeared. Her face went empty. Her eyes went empty. She was gone. And she'd been standing there with this pot of coffee, and she said, yeah, whatever. Dropped our check on the table and spun on her heel and walked off. And I sat there thinking, what the heck did I do now? You know, what did I say? I just was going over everything in my mind. I'm thinking, well, I said this. I kind of smiled when I said that. You know, I wonder if I couldn't come up with anything. I did eventually come up with something, but I'm going to stop at this point, and I'm going to see what your reactions are to what I've related to you so far. Your own personal experiences, what you think might have been going on. Yes, please.
My impression is you just absolutely minimized her experience and how tough it is for her raising her son.
Thank you, yes. Or maybe it was because something that was very detrimental, that even that comment you gave was positive. Her situation with him, it was something that was not gonna overcome that positivity. So even though she knew that what you were saying could be right, but because of whatever the issue may have been, it just wasn't gonna fit at that time. So, I mean, maybe down the road now, maybe after she thought about it and things have changed today, it probably came right back to her when you said that. It's like my godmother passed away, and she used to teach us things when we were younger. You know, sitting there like a blank, what are you talking about? But as I got older and I got myself in situations, I could hear her say that, and it would make me feel such a relief. So maybe she just didn't see that at that time when you said it, but who knows how it is today for her.
I wrote down with your story and your story the power words have. I mean, somebody can say something, like you could have said that to me, and I said, well, geez, I hope so.
Yeah.
But if you said it to anybody, but that white privilege thing, a person of color has a different set of fears for a woman. A woman has a different set of fears for her son than I might have, especially living in the suburbs, you know. I don't want them to go drinking in their friend's house or something like that, but that's not the fear that this woman clearly had. And about your uppity, I have a friend, I was friendly with, this is to use your thing, I was friendly with this woman who was in charge of our Medco program, and we needed to call a parent of a Boston student, and she got off the phone, and she was all huffy, and she hung up, well, that's one uppity blankety blank, and I was stunned, and she said, oh, pick your jaw up off the floor. And walked away, and I never knew what to do about that. I still don't. But she felt entitled to say it.
Maybe one thing that came to me was that you're encouraged, when somebody's in pain, the last thing they want to hear sometimes is encouragement. Like they want to be empathized with or something. And so maybe your encouragement touched her despair. Like it maybe made her feel, like not really heard or understood.
Emmanuel Chan again for calling me Mister. Definitely, like even in your last question and that kind of stuff, I feel like a lot of things happen that that are not in the book. There are a lot of things that happen that we don't know about, and I think those are the things that kind of help us. Like the event, I never get frustrated about the event. The event just tell us where we are at a specific point in time in life. And in your scenario, like literally, I always make it my personal decision not to give advice or provide advice to people. You can say things like, I wish or I hope, that kind of stuff, but never promise someone something that they can't, that you don't have the power to have, or you don't have the control to have. So the hopeful things that they kind of like things that I wish this would, or I wish, that kind of stuff, because there's not enough time to learn the actual story. Like that person could have killed someone and already, on the death sentence or whatever the case would be, so it's just not really hope in her eyes. So definitely it's just just that little turn. But like I said, those events are just telling us where we are. It doesn't really make you right or wrong.
I'm trying to figure out my words here. But I think, I look at my parents, they're both black. I'm adopted, so I'm only half black. But, my mother always says was so pleased she had girls because she knows how hard it is for black men. No matter what your age, you always go through it. And so many people say, oh, you're a black woman, you've got double whammy, you're female and you're black. But the struggles that black men go through for their entire lives, and it's not always hard struggles, it could be something surfacey, it could be whatever, but there's always a stigma, there's always something. And for someone to say, it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be great, it just feels like you just don't get it. It's like, and I don't know if these are the right words, but I'm thinking, and I can imagine, I can put myself in her place. I don't have any children, but what you said about minimizing the problem and just not being able to connect and relate to what that situation is that she's probably going through. And you don't get that worried about your kids, like you said, you get worried if they go work at someone's house. But the struggles and challenges that black men face at every age.
So your life and death.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
the worries a mother has for a son are very different than
The worries you have for
And my name's Christine Wolf, because I have like a lot of mothers, and my mom says to me, well, that's my son, that's my son. Well, yeah, that's your son, but that's my brother. So she kind of like, well, don't talk to him like that. Well, that's my brother, and I'm going to say what I want to say, whether you like it or not. No disrespect to your mom, but if my brother's wrong, he's wrong, and I'm going to say it. So mothers have that tendency with the boys that they can do no wrong, even though they know that they're wrong. They're going to just put like a veil over there for their son because those are their sons. And that's my experience as far as, I'm a mother too and I'm a grandson. But like I said, my mom, it's like, I'm serious, really? But that's her son. And maybe that's what the woman was thinking, that that's my son. You don't know what happened. I don't know either. But the love she saw that you have with you and your son, that might have kind of touched her as well. So it was like, she probably was like, I wish I had something like that, and it was a connection and a lack of a connection. So again, it was something that was hurting her, and she saw that you had, you know what I mean?
Thank you. I'm going to continue, and this one little part I'm going to read here because I wrote it down right away after it was told to me, and so I want to make sure I capture the words correctly. But as I was sitting there in the restaurant trying to figure out what I had done wrong, I had this memory rose up in my mind so clearly of a conversation several months earlier, about 8 months earlier. We'd been out on the East Coast. This conversation with these two black women, both mothers of teenage boys, I remembered it with such clarity. It was as if these two women were suddenly at the table with me. That's how present the memory was. And when I had been there with these two women, and we'd met their sons, and their sons were just so easy to talk to and so just sweet and delightful. And they had left the room, and Gene had left the room, and I was sitting alone with these two mothers, and for whatever reason, they decided to begin telling me about how they had to train their sons to behave when they were stopped by the police. And as they talked, their words picked up. They started talking over one another so that I was hearing this barrage of words and pain that just accelerated as they spoke. Their sentences came out fast and overlapping, the images and the pain interweaving until they formed one common experience spoken from their two mouths. Inevitable encounters with the police stopped just because they're black. Even if they weren't doing anything, just driving along, they weren't doing anything wrong. I had to teach him exactly where to put his hands. Someone screaming at him through the window, show me your license, show me your registration. I had to teach him how to move his hands so slowly so they didn't think he was reaching for a weapon. How he should look, what he should do with his eyes, what words he should say, and what words he should never use. Otherwise, he might be shot. And then one of the women said to me, can you imagine what it would feel like to have to teach your son those things? And I wanted to say, yes, I can imagine it, because I wanted to be an ally. And I couldn't. What did I teach my son? Don't speed, obey the law, and you'll be fine. You know, that's all you have to watch out for, is to obey the rules, and you won't be stopped. And so I had to tell him, no, I'm sorry, but I can't. I don't know what that feels like. And those were the words that came back to me as I was sitting in the restaurant with the waitress. I thought, I don't know what that feels like, to be the mother of a black son. You know, I thought of them telling me, I remember this one woman kept saying, if I could just keep my son young forever, if he just didn't have to grow up. And what had I said to this waitress? It's going to get easier for him as it gets older? It's not going to get easier, it's going to get harder. I knew that. I knew it already, and I forgot it. When white people say to me, what's white privilege? I don't get white privilege. I'm not privileged, whatever, the things that you all have heard people say. To me, one of the most insidious elements of white privilege is that we can forget. We can know things that are the truth, and we can forget we have that freedom to forget. And so at that point, honestly, it was like these two women were sitting here at the table with me, and they were just looking at me like, okay, get up, off your butt, out of the chair, and go fix this. And I'm thinking, okay, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to look like a fool. Anything I do is going to make me look like a fool. But then I thought, you know what? That is the better choice. The worst choice is allowing this rift to go unaddressed with the waitress. And the even worse choice is letting down these two women who loved me so much that they were willing to tell me this painful truth. This sacrifice on their part required an equal sacrifice on my part. And so at this point, Gene and our son were getting ready to leave. They'd been talking the whole time. They weren't paying attention to anything I don't think I was doing. And I said, you guys go ahead. I'll meet you out in the car. I have to go talk to our waitress. And I started looking for her all around the restaurant. They had smoking sections at that time. I went back in the smoking section, went in the restroom and looked under the stalls, I couldn't find her anywhere. And all the while I'm talking to these two women in my head, I'm looking for her, And finally I thought, I'm going to have to go in the kitchen and look for her. And knew that was against the rules. But fortunately, as I got to the kitchen door, she was coming out. She was carrying this great big tray, with these plates on it. And I didn't know what I was going to say. And I just stood right in front of her and just looked at her. And she just looked in, and she just bored into my eyes. And she turned aside, and I thought she was going to walk off. And I thought, well, I don't blame her, And she didn't, though. She set the tray down on an empty table. And she just turned around back to me, and she just reached her arms out for me. And so I went to her, and we held each other. And at one point, she put her head on my shoulder, right here, and just started bawling. And she cried and cried for a long time. And we were both crying. We were just kind of rocking each other. And it was like we were each giving and taking comfort at the same time. And after a long time, she finally stepped back and she kind of smiled at me and she said, actually, things are going to get better. She said, I believe it, with people like you and me working together and with the help of God, things will get better. We will do it with His help and with each other. And we parted. I don't remember how we parted. I wrote in the book I probably wouldn't recognize her face if I passed her on the street. But what I have never, ever forgotten was the power of that moment of healing. Her largeness of heart, that she was willing to reach past whatever pain that she was feeling, whatever anger, because she must have been thinking, why did I trust this woman who was inevitably going to hurt me with my vulnerability, And so her graciousness to be willing to reach out to me at that point has stayed with me. She's somebody I carry around in my heart, and she's somebody who motivates me to continue doing this work. Because that's something, I'm so glad you said that about the promise, because I had made a promise to her that I couldn't keep, And so I thought, okay, what promise can I make that I can keep? The promise I can make that I can keep is that I will continue to search my own mind and heart and soul for traces of this conditioning, and that I will continue to do this work, to be engaged in this work. That's the promise that I can make now. So please, I invite your feedback, comments, questions.
Well, I don't look at it as a total racial issue. I look at it as could be an economic issue as well. When you were telling the story, and you were saying that you weren't leaving the store, I was thinking of this special that ABC does, What Would You Do?
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking of that, and then I was also thinking of the comment that he was making at women would probably react better than men would. They would call, and men probably wouldn't call. But what you did was you went back and said, I'm gonna try to fix the situation. Women tend to be more sensitive to those issues, trying to heal it, and it gets back to way back when it's your grandma. You go to grandma, take care of grandma. She'll teach you this, she'll teach you that, and grandma teaches daughter, and it goes on. It's a historical thing. But what your story, I'm analyzing it not being a racial issue, of an issue where a mom who has to be at work is concerned about her son growing up and the defenses that he's going to have, defensive mechanisms. And it could be from anything, like you were saying that you don't know if he's been arrested, he's getting out of jail, having to teach my children, that when he walks on the street that he might be called out, saying, put your hands up, what are you going to have to do? Don't say what? Why are you calling on me? Yes, sometimes, majority of the times it does happen to African Americans or someone who is non-white, appearance-wise, I have to say that. But also children who are low economic level in the neighborhood that they're living in have been subjected to that, thinking that, well, look at the way you looking. You got your hair all looking like this and all this. There's obviously something wrong with you, and you're swaying to the side. And I'm thinking he could be having a diabetic reaction or something like that. So I think we tend to look at things, too many scenarios, and just looking at what's in front of you. How can I help the situation in front of you? And again, it goes back to what you're saying about being conscious of the words that we're using to other people. And then I'm also looking at my faith and how I would say, like you're saying, what would you say to that woman? Says, you know what, do you believe in God? And then here it comes out, my Christianity, if you believe, it may not come when you want it to come. It will come when God knows it will happen. So you have to be prepared for that. And I will continue to pray for you. So it's like you're giving her that leader, that leadway into a possible. And then also, we tend to give money, and that's not the salvation. We need to, how can we help her? How can we help the scenario? How can we help this situation out? That's just, I can go on and on about that, but.
That's what I was going to say too, after you came out and went looking for her, and then you put a head on your shoulder, and how it's going to change. Because with any person, when you do put the spiritual aspect in the situation, and you believe that it does, it's just like this calming sensation that just comes over you. And it's in the Bible. He may not come when you want him, but he'll come on his own time and necessary. And we all know that. But for some reason, we just want it right then and there. But I think when you are raised in, that came out like that, and that's probably what she walked away with, even though she was like, whatever. But while she was working, she was thinking about all that. And, the thought that, you said it's going to get better. She thought about that as well. So maybe she might have been looking for you too, but she couldn't come because she was working, But when you all did embrace it, you all had that, it was just something with that touch. So, it was, a spiritual thing that came out.
And what I actually failed to say, because I wasn't reading it, I missed a part, is that I did apologize to her. I told her, I knew this, that your son had a different experience than mine, but I forgot it, and I know that I hurt you, and I'm really sorry, So I did offer her that, and that was the point at which we embraced. That was probably a pretty important point, but.
I have to say that piece where you embraced and you went back and you found her, I think that's what this is about, like finding that connection. So maybe it didn't go right the first time, and you find a way to make it work. You apologize for your mistake. You're going to make mistakes, we're all human beings, but you figure out how to make it work. to move forward and to grow from it. So I thought that was wonderful. And then those two women that you were talking to about how they had to teach their sons what to do when they were stopped by police. I mean, my mother didn't have to teach me, but she had to teach my sister, because she's much darker, how to shop. How to shop in a store. And my mother's not the first black woman I've heard this. You have to teach your children how to shop in a store. You can shop while white, and you can shop while being of color. For me, I've always been able to blend with whatever I need to. But my sister is very, very dark. And so from the get-go, my mom said, you don't go into stores alone, you do not touch items unless you are sure you're gonna purchase them, you bring them right up to the register, you have your money in hand. If it's cash, it's even better, you know what I mean? So, and she's not the first one. I've heard prominent African-American women say this on panels. I've heard women just at work say it. It's a daily occurrence.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that, I never had to teach my children that. But the policeman is your friend.
Yep.
My daughter got a flat tire in Weston, and now I never would have done this, but she drove right into the police station with the flat tire and went in and said, "Can somebody help me change a tire?" And the sergeant went out and changed the tire for her. Now, do I think he would have done that for a woman of color? Maybe. But for
Oh, you would have done it for me. I would have made it.
Yeah. Because you would have smiled.
But that's a different, you know what I mean?
That's a different dynamic.
It's a different type of privilege that I have.
But I don't know that, and I don't think your friend's sons would have ever thought to drive into a police station.
Because that happened to me. I didn't have a flat tire, but I actually left my key running in the ignition of the car running, and the doors were locked. And fortunately, there was like an police. It wasn't a police station. It was like the investigator station or something like that. So I ran in there, and I said to him, I locked my keys in my car, and the car's still running. And it was a white cop, and he was like, I said, yeah, it's running, it's right there, it was right across the street. He says, well, we don't have the equipment, but just give me a minute. And he called somebody, and they did come and unlock my door.
Cool.
And I was, what? So that's why I said I kind of like have to, because, I mean, then again, it's always the way you approach them, too. You know what I mean? So I think that has a lot to do with it.
Absolutely.
Well, I think women would be more likely to do it too, is I guess what I was trying to say, or girls, women or girls. Whereas guys of any color might not be inclined to do that. I don't think, yeah.
I think the point is, I really appreciate all of these comments, because it's not a simple issue. There's layers and layers and layers of meaning and differences, and situations can change. I like what you're saying about just seeing what's in front of you, and understanding that we just don't know what's going on with somebody else. But we're responsible, each of us, for our own decisions about how to move forward. And sometimes making that decision requires some soul searching. Sometimes it requires the willingness to tolerate discomfort. And I think that's a major piece in race work for everybody, whether you're white or black and any other ethnic group, is the ability to tolerate discomfort.
I think that goes back to the ladder of inference. So quickly we move to make assumptions and move up that ladder so quickly based on our own backgrounds, our own histories, experiences, and we forget that other people don't have the same histories and backgrounds and experiences that we do.
Yeah.
So
I think we're gonna end with just, I'm gonna read just 3 minutes of this, this story that's called Hands, which is kind of an accumulation of several small incidents involving physical touch. And the beginning of this is a hypothetical incident. This particular thing I'm going to read is not something that happened to me. As I mentioned in the beginning, I was raised by a mother who taught me love and taught me that my well-being depended upon being connected with people. And so I call this, I would say this is like a parable, and I call it The Little Girl and the Cookie. A white woman and her young daughter are walking together along a busy sidewalk, holding hands. Coming toward them is a man with dark-colored skin. As the man approaches, the child becomes keenly aware of changes in her mother's body, and she begins to feel anxious. Mother's breathing quickens slightly, and the child notices that they're walking a little bit faster. Now she's conscious of the pulse pounding in her mother's fingers. The little girl looks around to see what has frightened the one she relies on for protection, but she finds no indication of danger. She's confused, and she looks up at her mother's face for reassurance. But Mother looks straight ahead, her expression giving no clue about the nature of the threat. She starts squeezing her daughter's hand so tightly that it's beginning to hurt. The child's own body is shaking now as she runs to keep up with her mother's lengthening steps. She has stopped trying to figure out what's wrong and is focused only on getting to safety. In the next moment, they have passed the man with the dark-colored skin. He continues walking down the sidewalk, going farther and farther away, and slowly, Mother's grip relaxes. Her breathing and her pace return to normal. The throbbing in her fingers subsides. The little girl's body relaxes too. She's very relieved, not only because her mother is happy again, but also because now there's no more confusion in her mind. She received the message loud and clear. You see, in this case, no words were necessary. The squeeze of the hand contained a highly concentrated dose of all the mother's race conditioning from her birth up to the present, transmitted in an instant directly into the child. The fear shot along the girl's nerves from her hand to her brain, where it bonded securely to the only other sensory input available, the image of a dark-skinned man. Because she was so young, the child did not have the capacity to evaluate this transmission. And because the message was sent by someone that she trusted implicitly, it lodged in the deepest places of her mind, those that are most resistant to change. Some have called this the poison in the cookies, the transfer of unwarranted fear disguised as a legitimate urge to protect. Fortunately, every poison has an antidote, and the story is not yet ended. Perhaps the little girl can be healed by the very thing that delivered the toxin in the first place. Perhaps she can be healed by the touch of a hand. And so then there's stories, short stories following that one that talk about moments of physical contact and how healing those can be. And sometimes they're a little nerve-wracking, but they can be very, very healing. The one I was going to share with you if I'd had a little more time was about being in a toll booth in a rainy night, and the toll attendant, who was a black man, and it was late at night, and we were lost. And I rolled my window down to pay the toll, because this was a booth kind of thing, and he stuck his hand out, and I had the coins, and I placed the coins in his hand, but I didn't want to lose touch with him. There was something very comforting about that contact. And so as I asked for directions and as he explained the directions, I left my fingers there. And he had these huge hands. He was a very tall man with long arms. And he enfolded my whole hand into this big hand of his and just held my hand through the window in the rain while he told me the route. And I felt like he had charged me with energy, you know. And so I'm an advocate, I'm a staunch advocate for physical contact. Because I think it heals things that have been injured at a wordless level that maybe cannot be healed through words, but maybe can be healed through touch.